Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Power Man Podcast. My name is Rory Paquette, and I am, as always, your very humble host. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got a fantastic show lined up for you. A couple of guys that run their own podcast and have some great stories, have overcome some incredible obstacles, and you're going to hear from them in just a moment. They're awesome, and you're going to love this. So stay tuned. A little housekeeping before we get rolling. I do want to thank everybody for all of the feedback and all of the questions and comments that have come in lately. This episode airs after our 150th, and the 150th is out there right now as the time at this time of the taping. And the feedback has been insane from you folks. You are the reason we got to 150 episodes. You're the reason why we keep doing this and why we keep getting awesome people like Justin Wegner from Backbone Swag, who turned it into Day 41 Apparel. We get some of the best guests around on this podcast, and it's because people like you are listening, people like you are sharing on social media, and people like you are joining our group. Our group on Facebook, The Power of Man Within, is at an all-time high. And you gentlemen that are in there are bringing some new flavor to the group. You're talking about your trials and tribulations and talking about obstacles you've overcome in your lives. You're doing a fantastic job of sharing your stories and uplifting other guys. I want to make sure that everybody understands we do have a private Facebook group. It's for men, fathers and husbands primarily. But if you're not a father or a husband and you're just, a guy trying to get through this world, this is a great group for you as well. You also don't have to be in your 50s like I am. All right. We have an interview that's, probably will have aired already by the time this one comes out. But, with a young guy who's, in his 20s and just graduated from being in the Navy. So, we have a very young movement. We've got a lot of old guys. We got some middle-aged folks like these cats I'm talking to today. And I just want to keep thanking you folks. I can't thank you enough. It's been my passion project. It's been my pleasure to serve you all this time. And just thank you, and thank you. If you want to reach us, send us any messages. You can always reach us at Power of Man Podcast on Instagram. You can find us on send us an email at powerofmanpodcast@gmail.com. And you can always find me on Facebook under my name, which you guys probably know by now is RoryPaquette. And if you didn't write that down real quick, it is in the show notes and you'll be able to find it. Link for the group is in the show notes as well. All right, real quick. Got to take a sip of my preferred beverage before I get going. Oh my goodness, that is so good. And if you are someone who's been following our program for any length of time, and I know you are, then you know what we're drinking. That's right. It's Freedom Hill coffee. Yeah, that's right. Deep, dark, rich, bold, beautiful, just like my wife. They brew a mean cup of joe. They do everything with high quality. They do all the right things for all the right reasons, and they take care of and support veterans, which is why we support them. Look them up on Instagram at Freedom Hill Coffee. Tell them Power Man sent you. All right. We got to get rolling. These guys are looking at me. They're like chomping at the bit. They can't wait to tell their stories and be on this awesome program. We have the guys from let me start with this. We have Steve Heyman and Nick Berkey. All right. We don't have their partner, Chris. So, Chris, I'm giving you your shout out, brother, even though you couldn't make it today. And I totally understand. We all have lives, man. These are the creative geniuses behind the Whiskey Chaser podcast. And I got to tell you, when I first heard about this podcast, I was like, Whiskey Chaser podcast. And you think it's a couple of guys, hanging out, just having some drinks and stuff. These guys know their stuff. All right. In the pre-interview, I'm talking to these guys about how much they spend on liquor. It would blow you away how much these guys are willing to spend on a bottle. I'm not going to reveal that. If they want to, they can. I'm not sure their wives know. So we got to keep it, under wraps here, Power Man. But please welcome to the show, Steve Heyman, Nick Berkey, and the Whiskey Chaser podcast. Guys, welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Excited to be here.
Thank you for being here today. All right, I have talked enough in the last few minutes. So why don't you guys, I don't take turns, but tell our listeners what the show is, where it came from, what you do, and why you do it.
Yeah, so this is Steve, and Whiskey Chasers podcast came about
from me meeting up with Nick and Chris. I worked with Nick for a while. He was a big whiskey drinker. I liked whiskey also. He invited me to join a club. So we get together, drink whiskey, hang out with a bunch of guys, and kind of just spend some time together bonding over the liquor. And I really liked podcasts. I wanted to start one, so I reached out to him and said, "Hey, let's start a podcast." And they said, "All right, so I can just sit in a room and drink whiskey and there just now is a microphone there? Great. Let's do it." So that's how Whiskey Chasers came to be. And now we have been going strong for about 3 years now. And our whiskey uh, collection has grown massively in the process.
Yeah.
Nick's going, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yeah, it's grown a little from where it was before. But yeah, we the podcast really got started out of the club.
Mhm.
And you talk about the whole idea of power of man, right? Chris and I used to get together monthly or every couple of months and have a bottle, open a new bottle, share a bottle, almost finish the bottle. The idea wasn't to get drunk. The idea wasn't to get intoxicated. The idea was let's talk. Let's sit down and have a moment where we get to talk. And as Chris and I sat and we talked about this, and we said, well, why don't we do this with more guys? So let's start a club and do this. And then we met Steve. And Steve said, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast?" We enjoy getting together once a month and enjoying food, having dinner, drinking.
Mhm.
But I really want to do a podcast, and you guys know your stuff about whiskey, so let's do a whiskey podcast. And like Steve said, we said, well, we get to sit around and drink and talk and sure, why not? Let's do this. We've been doing it by ourselves for years now. How about we do it with a microphone and with another person?
Mhm.
So we got started the podcast from the club and from that. So
Mhm.
that's the gist of that.
Yep.
All
And
right.
every episode, we kind of go down the rabbit hole of the
Yeah.
history of the podcast or the history of the different distilleries, how they got their start, why they got their start, and why they started distilling whiskey or making whiskey, and trying to get to that root cause of what that is, and then building community around it.
Rabbit hole's the best way to describe that too.
Yeah.
No, that's all beautiful stuff. No, I know because I've had a chance to talk to you guys a little bit. Our listeners, of course, haven't. But so Nick, you're related to Chris, the guy who couldn't come today. You're
Yes. So
brothers-in-law.
yes. So Chris and I married sisters.
Mhm.
So we like to say that we're brothers more than brothers-in-law. Like we both grew up in a large family, but eh, we're because of those the sisters were the only two girls in the family, so we're closer than brothers at this point. We commiserate
That's
together.
awesome. All right.
We we get together to try to get away. Anything we can do. That's how we grow together. Yes, as brothers.
Careful now. We have a very strong female listenership also, and your wife might just hear this podcast. So I'm just giving you fair warning. Right?
If she does, I've said this on the whiskey podcast several times. If she's listening, she will probably laugh and then smack me later on. So it's bound to happen.
I mean, whatever you're into, man, as long as that works out. Okay. Beautiful, beautiful. All right. And then Steve, now you mentioned it, but Steve, you brought the idea of the podcasting in, right? So
I did. Yeah.
okay. And
Yeah.
your idea there was give us your vision for what you were talking to these guys about.
Yeah, so I met up with Nick. Nick was more into whiskey than I was. I liked it, but I didn't really have the palate for it. I knew what a bad whiskey was and what a good whiskey was, couldn't figure out what a great whiskey was. So invited these guys on to really figure that out, and then I decided I liked podcasting and I wanted to try that. So I reached out to them and said, "Hey, you guys are the experts here. Let me be the idiot and let's ask you a bunch of questions and figure out how this world works." And that it kind of grew from there.
Nice. Nice.
Mhm.
Nice. Okay. So you guys, I mean, you guys are you come across, and I mentioned this to you before, but you come across when you're during your show, like you're just, three buddies hanging out, at a table, just drinking some whiskey. You've informed me that there's no table in the room. But it really is how you come off. And it turns out that is kind of really what's going on in the background, right?
Right. Yeah, I really wanted to create this idea of um hmm, so the idea of being able to open a bottle and share a bottle.
Mhm.
The idea of being able to create a memory or an environment that people felt comfortable enough that they wanted to be a part of it and they wanted to join in, and not standoffish. There's Chris and I have talked several times. There's this idea that, especially for men, you have a glass of something in hand, all of a sudden you want to talk, and you're fine talking about whatever that is. It doesn't matter what the glass is. It could be a mug. It could be a beer. It could be whiskey. It doesn't matter. Whatever that glass is, there's this idea that if I have something in hand that's similar to what everyone else has, then I'm willing to recognize they're at the same level I am. So I'm willing to talk. They're willing to talk. Let's just have a conversation. And so the podcast kind of turned into that over time of just, we all have the same glass. Let's just sit and talk. And if people want to join in, even though they're not here in the moment, who are we to keep them from joining in that moment and being a part of that?
Mhm.
That's beautiful. And, that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you guys on the show at first, was because I could just tell. I mean, the energy, between you guys. I mean, the fact that you are actually friends, you're not just working together and putting up with each other for, the time you're on the podcast. You can tell when there's a chemistry between people and when they actually, care about one another. It sounded like, three brothers just hanging out, doing their thing, who actually care about what's happening in each other's lives. And I love the way you said that. When you have that glass in your hand, then you can relax. You're amongst friends. And it was one of the things that brought me to you, that I wanted to share with the audience before I even started talking to you about, who you were individually. So congratulations on your authenticity coming through like that. Is that something you've intended, or is that just a byproduct of the fact that you guys are all close, you're all friends?
I think it's something that was pretty natural. It just that, like I said, when we started this, the goal was to just sit and talk. And that's how it started, was just three dudes in a room talking. And as we've grown and continued to go, the goal has become, let's try to make sure we're doing this in a way that invites others to also be a part of that conversation, in a way that makes it more available to everyone. And so, like I said at the beginning, my role was to be the one that didn't know what we were talking about, and to have them kind of really educate me. And they nailed it. Now I've been educated. So now, so now we, all three of us kind of talk about all of that, and kind of bring our own perspectives to the whole thing. And so we can have these good conversations that hopefully other people enjoy listening to and can also add to in their own way.
I, you ask, was it intended? Was it natural? Right? It just seems so natural. I remember the first time that we all decided, we got together and said, okay, let's have someone else on the podcast. And we decided it was going to be one of the guys from the club. Let's have him on and be a part of this. And we had no idea what we were doing. I think we had two mics at that point. So we really had to be challenged in that small room and area, share mics. But there was something to be said about him being a part of it, that ever since then, his response to us is, he's been on several times since, but his response has been, anytime you want me on, let me know. And every guy that we've been able to have on the podcast literally is, hey, when can I be on next? When can I join next? There's something fun about being a part of that. I don't know what I'm talking about. We had one guy that said, I'm a teacher. I think they'll frown upon me drinking, and I really don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm kind of hesitant on being a part of this. And he joined one time. And ever since then, hey, when can I join next? And I remember asking him, like, well, are you afraid about the whole teaching? I don't care. I don't think they listen, but I don't care at this point. Like, it's just so much fun to be a part of this and be a part of a community and be able to sit and chat and talk,
That's beautiful. I'm trying to do this with a straight face, but I can just picture the guys going, anytime you want me on the show,
Right.
you let me know.
Yeah.
That is, that's just absolutely magnificent. Listen, let me change gears a little bit though, because I don't want anybody to, have heard about this podcast for the first time and be thinking that it's, just some casual, guys hanging out getting drunk or something. I mean, you guys, I mean, you go on location. often. You talk about the history of the distilleries. You talk about what goes into, the barrels and the flavors, and it. The more I listen to your podcast, the more I'm amazed at what I don't know yet. And so you guys really do know your stuff. Tell everybody like about that part of the podcast, because that really makes you different than anything else I've heard.
Yeah, so I'm the big history guy. I've always liked history, that's always been a passion of mine. And it's what makes whiskey, I think, a little bit different than some of the other alcohol out there. That there is just such a rich history involved in whiskey and how it came to be, where it came from, the different laws that have happened. You have this whole era where it wasn't even allowed in prohibition and how that worked and what's still around today because of it. It's really fascinating to go back through that. So that's something that's always drawn me to whiskey. Then when I got together with Nick and Chris, what I learned was there's more on top of that in all of these different distilleries. There's a lot of the history of how they may have gotten started, the history of things like bottled and bond and how that came to be. But then there's also this other part of it in that it's a bunch of people that are starting small family businesses that have these craft distilleries that are only around in their neighborhood or in their state. So like, there's different distilleries that are only available in the state that they're in, and they're not available outside of that. So we're in Ohio. We don't ever hear about them unless we leave the state and come across them in some way. So going deep into how those distilleries got started and whether that's a deep history, like something like Jim Beam, that you go really deep into how far back it goes and all the different people involved, or you have something like Watershed here in Columbus. That's a small little local distillery that's getting some notoriety out there and getting out into the world, but has only been around since 2018, I think. Uh, and they've figured out how to get their name out there, and it's some guy that used to compete competitively in volleyball, and all of a sudden now he's doing whiskey. So how did that happen? So going deep into figuring out what that world is and how they get started and how that passion came to be, that's another big part of it for us.
And Chris and I did not want to be the next, the next podcast that talked about here's the notes that we're getting, here's the smell, the nose, the palate, there's it's saturated with that idea. And so we didn't want to become that. And I think, like Steve mentioned, he's big into history. So I think the podcast with the three of us, it pulls out the best part of us individually. And Chris is big on here's the journey that this takes me on. Here's a moment of I taste this and I remember this experience. I remember this. It reminds me of this. And here's what I did. Here's the hot summer day that it takes me on. And he's very big on the journey and what it reminds him of. And I grew up with a large family, and I grew up with a grandpa that passed away years ago. But his biggest thing was talking about heritage. Family meant something. Heritage meant something. Where you came from meant something. And that plays a huge role for me for when it comes to distilleries. And Steve talked about, craft distilleries always start because of a passion, but then sometimes lead into a family lineage of my dad taught me how to do this. And I remember this is what my dad taught me. And now it plays a part in my whiskey and my bourbon. And it plays a role in the story of what I'm telling as I'm sharing this. And so for me, I love talking history. I love talking why you do what you do. And so you talk about going on site. I remember there's a interview we did with a gentleman named Dave, if I can remember his name,
Yep.
from Still 630 out in St. Louis, Missouri. And Steve and I were the only ones to make it to this, and Chris hates himself for not being able to make it. But we got through the interview, and he kept wanting to pour more stuff for us. Here's something else I've done. Here's something else I've experimented with. Because he saw a passion in us that we saw in him. So we saw a passion light up in him, and we said, this is so cool. Why do you do what you do? What drives you to do what you do? We want to talk about that. We want people to understand why you do what you do, because that matters. That matters just as much as what you're drinking, just as much as what you're making. Why you do what you do matters more than that at the same time. We had to remind him 3 times.
Yeah.
I think 3 times that he had an interview that he had to go to because he just didn't want to stop pouring stuff and stop drinking. He didn't want to lose the moment of just finding someone that had the same passion, that saw what he did and appreciated what he did. So the podcast is less about here's what we're tasting, here's the notes we're pulling off of. It's more of here's the journey from start to finish. Here's the history. Here's where the history kind of stops in the books. Here's the history of kind of the family lineage and what the story is told through the bottle. And then here's the bottle. Here's the journey we remember or the memories we have that come to life because of this bottle. Something in flavor, something from the taste. Could be the age, could be the look of the bottle. There's all kinds of things that Chris just goes off of for his journey. And so it just takes you along this idea of it's not just about, ooh, this is a, a $50 glass, at a bar, or this is a $300 bottle. This turns into there's a reason this was created, and we want to express what that reason is, and we want to share why this means so much to us.
I mean, wow. I don't think that anybody could have explained it better than that right there. I mean, that's gigantic. That's a huge thing that separates you guys from anything else I've heard. I mean, it definitely separates you guys and sets you apart. So the
We were
history
worried
part
it
is
was
awesome.
we thought it would be boring, so that's why we tone it down to we just sit in a room and we drink and we talk.
That's the easy way to look at it,
Right,
But
exactly.
yeah, that's all right. I'm getting thirsty just listening. I got to take another sip of my preferred beverage. Pardon me for 2 seconds. My listeners know I've been fighting these allergies for a while. I don't know when I became allergic to everything. 50 maybe 52. Who knows? At some point, I just became allergic to stuff. I don't get it, but that happens when you get old. You guys will have to worry about that later.
That's down the road.
Yeah, way down the road. I can tell. Um, that's fantastic. I love that. Is there anything else about the content of the podcast, or where you guys are at with it, or anything that you want to share with folks that we've left out today? Because I want to move this subject a little bit to something else we were talking about.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that the big thing is that when somebody thinks about whiskey, the something that your head either goes to an old man sitting on a porch, or it goes to like a college kid and getting drunk as a skunk. So you got to kind of figure out where this middle ground is, and learn that whiskey is one of those things that, yes, it's alcohol, but that's kind of besides the point. We're not looking to get drunk. We're not looking to get those effects in that way. Our goal is kind of more like a fancy coffee or whatever that thing may be for you. Um, that it's our bonding point. That's what we're looking for, is just that thing that gets us all together. And for us, that's whiskey. For other people, it may be coffee, it may be tea, it may be whatever it may be. But look for that thing and do that. But for us, it's whiskey. And if you also enjoy whiskey, then tune in.
Yes. Yeah, I would I would reiterate that.
Yeah.
Chris and I recently had a conversation about whiskey, and he looked at me, I'll never forget, he looked at me and said, I don't know about you, but um I think I'd still want to drink whiskey. And no, I don't think, I know I'd want to drink whiskey even if there was no side effects of it. I just want to drink for the flavor, the camaraderie that it builds, like just being able to sit together with people and drink, even if I never experienced what drunkenness was again in my lifetime. I'm fine with that. It's the idea of being able to sit down, enjoy something that tastes really good, that we can all sit around and go, this is either really good and we can get excited about that, or we can commiserate together and realize this tastes really bad and we got a really bad glass of something. It's the idea of just being able to enjoy together. So like Steve said, if that's something you're all for, check us out. Like just be a part of not necessarily even have to check us out. Be a part of a community that you can find that fits that, because that's we have found that means quite a bit. That community, that community matters quite a bit in life. And without that community, it's hard to figure out who you are and what you're going to do.
That is so big, and that is so 100% right. I could not agree with that statement anymore than I do right this second. Um, just about everybody who listens to this podcast is looking for something. We're all looking for our place in the world. We're looking for a community of brothers. We're looking for a place where we feel like we belong. Sometimes we're just looking for a place where we can let our guard down for 2 minutes and not feel like we're going to get attacked.
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, so I mean that right there, that mentality that you guys have both been talking about, in this last round of questions. Um, Fits so perfectly with our listeners. It's another reason why I'm so glad I met you guys and wanted to have you on. Um, and as I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you guys, I'm checking out your podcast, I'm thinking in my head, right? Because here I am, older guy, all my kids are grown. I'm an empty nester. I bellyache about it all the time. I know. Everybody's like, poor you raised three fantastic kids, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah. And when they're gone, you have no life anymore. But as I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you guys and I'm thinking, man, these guys, they drive around, they go to distilleries, they have an awesome podcast, they drink whiskey for fun, they're all friends. I mean, this is great. And in my head, I'm going, wait till they have kids. Okay. Because you know what's going to happen? That's all over. That's over with. I didn't even get to voice that to you guys. And before our interview, you guys confided something in me that most people would find rare to have to deal with, but the fact that you're both dealing with it was really very uncommon. And the fact that you were both kind of eager to talk about it, to put it out there for other men who may be having this issue and are not as open and honest as you guys. Okay. You're two of the most authentic guys I've ever met in my life. And I meet people every single day. So that's saying a lot. But the fact that you were willing to just help folks with this, sight unseen, you know what I mean, before we even really spoke, was huge. It spoke to me, and I wanted to make sure we included it in the show. There's a particular obstacle that you guys are both dealing with in your personal lives. You're both married. Um, Tell me about what you guys are dealing with. Tell our listeners what you guys are dealing with and how you're coping. Either one of you, and so on. But just go ahead.
Yeah. So I've been married now for 5 years. So we're having our 5-year anniversary in September. So it's coming right up. My wife and
Congratulations.
I, thank you. My wife and I met. I have always been very much into family. I come from a pretty a large extended family. It's just me and my sister, so it's not like we have a massive family just in our home, but extended family is big. I had my great grandma going way back, and so I had my great grandma till I was in college. So we had all this family time that I always had, and I wanted to extend that. I wanted to make sure that I had kids to keep on with the family and to raise and to make more good people out in the world. And a couple years in, my wife and I decided to start trying to have kids, and as it went, we were struggling with that. So went to some doctors, found out that we weren't able to get pregnant, and so that wasn't going to be an option for us. We didn't go all the way, as you go through those trials, you have to kind of figure out what is the problem in terms of medically, and then what are your different options. For us, the problem is my wife doesn't have eggs, or has very few of them. So because of that, your options are very limited. There's not a whole lot you can do to make that work. So my wife and I talked about that, kind of worked through that to figure out what do we want to do? Are we gonna not have kids? Are we gonna and just be okay with that? Do we want to do adoption, foster? What's the next step? And so my wife and I have decided to go the route of adoption. So we're in the process of starting that now, kind of starting to navigate that bureaucracy that is adoption, and figure out how to go about it, all the different rules and expenses that go along with it to go that route. And so that's something that my wife and I have been dealing with over the last couple of years as we've been trying to figure out what to do next after finding out that, a goal of both of ours, of having biological children wasn't on the table anymore. So it was either leave her or adopt, and I just figured I probably shouldn't leave her, and so we stuck it out and decided to go the adoption route. Nick?
Yeah, been married 10 years. And
Congratulations.
thank you. It's been an interesting journey. So I grew up with a very large family. We were 6 of us, so 4 kids, and we grew up in the middle of nowhere. We had cornfields. We had to choose cornfields as friends or siblings as friends, and that was kind of what we decided. Let's choose siblings. And my family grew very close together. Um, we had a lot of memories growing up as siblings. They're kind of our best friends, even though we hated them at times. We had to be friends. And because of that, I wanted kids. I thought this would be great. I want a close knit family. My dad and I rebuilt a old Volkswagen Beetle as my first car. My 2 brothers and I, my dad, we rode across Iowa on a bike ride, tandems. So there's so many moments we just grew close together, and ever since then I said I want a family. I want to recreate this. I want to have a moment where I get to have with my son or daughter of doing a bike ride or um, rebuilding a car and all the joys and sorrows that'll come with that. And so we got married, and I had this perfect idea that we'd have kids and it'd be great, and we couldn't have kids. And it turned into, well, now we're looking at surgery, and now we're looking at meeting with several doctors, and we're doing everything that we know possible short of adopting and fostering. And that was 5 years into our marriage of doing that and fighting it. And we decided 5 years in we have to be done. There was a lot of pain, especially for my wife, of going through all that and seeing all that, and the idea of it's me, it's my fault, that's an issue, and me as a husband going, it's not, I can't, I'm not putting it on you, I'm not putting it on me. It's not you or me, it's not you versus me. As a couple, we have to come to a decision on what's going to happen next and where we stand. And never forget telling my family. We told my family the same Christmas that we're moving to Columbus from Indiana. We also told them we couldn't have kids, and
Man.
we ended that conversation by letting them know that we both have a piece about it. We have an understanding that while we aren't able to have kids, and adoption and fostering is not necessarily something we want to go through, we feel that we should be going through. We have a piece about us not being able to have kids, and we had no idea what that meant other than we just felt like it was okay. And 5 years down the road from there, we have a lot of nieces and nephews and a lot of friends, close friends that have kids. And we are starting to understand that piece of not having kids doesn't mean we don't get to invest in families, doesn't mean we don't get to invest in kids. It means that we get to look at that from a different perspective. And we don't get to be their mom or their dad, but we get to be the cool aunt or uncle or friend that they get to come to when life gets tough and they don't want to talk to their parents about the weird stuff. They get to come to us, and we get to have the weird conversations, but in a very fun way. Maybe it's, shooting paintball guns at each other, or, different things where we get to have fun together, and we get to share those moments with them and let them know that life is okay, that they're meant for something. There's something out there for them. They don't have to worry about having that weird conversation with their dad or their mom, because they know their mom and dad love them. But that's a weird conversation to have with their parents of like, I don't really know what's going on, and I don't really know who I am. I don't know that I want to have that with my parent, because they're gonna have to tell me that I'm cool. They're gonna have to tell me that everything is all right. Like, they have to say those things.
Yeah.
My wife and I don't have to say those things. So it means a little bit more. It means something different to them. So
It's amazing that you guys are willing to share this. So first of all, let me thank you for that, because I'm not sure it gets more deeply personal than what you're both talking about right now. The not just so everybody's clear, because you, Nick, you're related to Chris, but yes, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yep. So the wives are sisters. So we
Right.
married sisters, sadly. Good.
But
No, we're happy about that.
I'm trying to make a point here, man.
Right.
Yeah.
But you two guys who have this
Mhm.
same issue, you're not related, your wives are not related, the whole bit. And yet
Nope.
somehow you come together as friends and you're able, I mean, I assume you guys have been able to be there for each other in some capacity since
Yeah.
you are probably the only people on earth that can understand one another and what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's
when this came about for me, it was Nick had already gone through all of this. So he was past it and had accepted it by the time I was starting it. So having him around to help with that conversation and being there to kind of figure that out was very helpful to like walk through that and figuring out what steps do you want to take next, what are you just going through, and so having somebody else around that had that similar experience was absolutely a godsend.
Yeah. I I don't know if Steve remembers this. I remember the conversation very clearly and the situation surrounding it. We talked about previously going to Missouri for a
That's right.
podcast interview, and it was just me and Steve. It was supposed to be me, Steve, and Chris. And then last minute, Chris was like, "Hey, I've got something with work. I can't get out of it. It's just you two." So we're talking like a 6, 7 hour drive, just Steve and I, and it's the first long time that we've spent together alone. And this topic gets brought up of kids and what does that look like? And I remember Steve looking at me saying, "We're still trying to figure that out. We're trying to we can't have kids right now. We're struggling. We're trying, but we don't know what that looks like. And we're trying to figure out the process to start figuring out what that looks like." And I remember thinking, this is a weird conversation. This is really strange how this all got started. You're talking we're two guys going to a distillery for an interview where we're going to be drinking and talking about about alcohol, and all of a sudden on the drive there it's, "Hey, so you and your wife going to have kids? Oh, you can't have kids either. Oh, that's weird. So do we sit here in silence or do we talk about it?"
I
you
mean,
know
what you guys have had to think of this. I mean, it can't just be coincidence, that comes
Right.
together like that. What are your thoughts on what brings you two together in this space, in this world right now with this situation?
Yeah, it's amazing how that works out when you meet somebody that has similar something else going on. It's a coincidence when you meet somebody that likes the same beer as you. It's a little bit something like this, like it happens a little bit more rarely. There are lots of people that go through it. It's not like this super unique thing, but to have two people that are going through something that similar and how drastically similar it is really amazing on how that works out. I'll let you go from there.
this is This is one of the things that I love. I absolutely love about the podcast, the relationship that it's been built, that has been building over time, and meeting Steve. Steve and I have very different viewpoints in life,
Mhm.
but that doesn't block us from growing together and being friends and challenging each other or just having conversations. I remember so my major in college is youth ministry and adolescent studies, and I was a youth pastor for a while. And I never forget having that first conversation with Steve about faith and about God, and never remember the outcome of that conversation. And me thinking, "Oh, this is going to be interesting." And we talk about the club, right? We mentioned briefly the club. We had a new guy come and he wants to be a part of the club, and Steve goes, "Oh, wait, what night was that?" And I told him, when I said, we talked a lot about God and religion that night. He still wants to be a part of this. And I thought it was hilarious hearing Steve say that, because then knowing where Steve comes from, we're completely different when it comes to faith. And you ask, "Well, how does this conversation come about?" I say all this because you ask me, "Well, how does the conversation come about?"
Sure.
I I think that it was in my opinion, I very much think it was a God moment of we both wanted Chris to be there. Even Chris wanted to be there. But it was a moment of God saying, like, not yet. Sorry. Like you guys get to have this conversation. This is something you guys get to figure out together and realize. For me at that point, it was a realization of, to put it bluntly, oh shit, someone else is going through this too. And sure, you have all this faith and belief of, other people is probably going to be doing this too, and you're going through this too. God's going to provide someone else to like lean on and understand. But up until that moment, it was like me. It's just me and my wife. And then talking to Steve, it was like, oh, it's this is reality. This isn't just me and my wife going through it. This is now me, Steve, and his wife understanding this is what we're all going through, and this is not fun. Not fun for any of us. And trying to figure out, what does that look like? I remember in that moment going, okay, do I look at Steve and go, well, that sucks? Or do I look at Steve and go, I've been there. I get that. And here's what we kind of went through. And do I put my big boy britches on at that moment and decide I'm going to tell him like, this, I get it. This, I'm going through the same thing. We've gone through the same thing. So if you need anyone to talk to, we're here. Like, we'd be happy to talk to you. Or do I just say, well, that sucks, and just move on? How do you decide what to do?
I mean, I'm going to be honest. I had a feeling. Okay, I mean, if I was going to guess, I could definitely tell there was a God vibe coming from you, Nick.
Yeah.
And I was not sure about you, Steve. I don't want to offend
Yep.
anybody or anything, but
No, you're okay. My faith journey has been all over the place. I grew up in the church and was raised in it. At one point, considered going into seminary, and have kind of ran that gamut all the way through. Which is why I think earlier in this podcast I said that meeting Nick and doing this was a godsend.
Yeah.
And even though I'm not a necessarily a believer, it still feels that way. So whether it's right or wrong or otherwise, it was still beyond human, that connection that may have happened. So yeah,
This is so crazy. I contacted you guys, I mean, about your show,
yeah,
Whiskey Chaser show, right? I mean, a couple of neat guys, sound great. It's a cool thing. I'll introduce it to my listeners. They'll get a kick out of it. I'll show them the show. We're good, right? Really good content. Let's move on. Before we even met, you guys volunteered this information to me, and I hadn't asked you about it. I mean, it wasn't like a topic or anything. Let me ask you this. What was it that made you think I better tell him about this?
Well, you said that this was Order of Man, and I listened to a few episodes, and
Hold
it
on,
was
it's Power of Man.
Right.
And I love
Come
you,
on,
and that's
Steve.
fine. Listen, Order of Man.
There's a very distinct difference.
but Order of Man is Ryan Mickler.
Order of Man
He
is
does
another
this
podcast.
better than just about anybody.
Right.
He's one of my mentors, to be honest
Yeah,
with you.
yeah.
I
It's
love the guy.
fantastic. It's a
So
great
you're not
show.
offending me, but I don't want him going, hey man,
Right.
stay off my coattails,
Right.
So
Yeah.
Power of Man, but go ahead.
Power of Man. Which, and you kind of pitched it as this is a show for husbands and fathers. I knew that there was a religious aspect to it. And with that, I thought there's a decent chance that he might ask something about, do you have kids, or something like that. And instead of just saying no, I thought it might be interesting to talk about. I think it's something that we're going through it. We randomly met and are going through the same thing. Odds of somebody else going through something similar that what we're going through and might benefit from hearing other people talking about it on a manliness podcast would be something that would be important to talk about.
I remember Steve calling me and saying, hey, this might be talked about. Do you have an issue with it? No, I really don't. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, this is interesting. This is very interesting because you talk about power of man, right? And you talk about fathers, husbands, that kind of thing. And starting out in this journey, as difficult and not fun as it was, there was that question of, I can't be a father, so what good am I as a man? If I can't provide that, then who am I? And sure, I'm a husband, but that's different. That's got to be different from being a man. Men can have kids, men can have a family. I can't. What does that mean? What does that look like? And um, I started thinking more and more about the title and thinking, well, if you talk about being a power of a man isn't just having kids or fathering kids. There's a whole lot more that goes into the power of a man and being a husband and being a father or being just a husband. There's nothing wrong with just that. And you can do so much and have so much impact on others around you, even if they're not your biological kids, even if they're not your kids. There's more than what you understand as far as the impact you have on those around you. Just by knowing and understanding, being a man, having kids doesn't make me a man. Being a father doesn't make me a man. That's not the definition of that. And understanding that opens the door for a lot more to happen.
I mean, Steve just nodded his head like, that's it. That's it right there. Wow. Seriously. I mean, I'm not often speechless. This is like a couple podcasts in a row where I've been speechless for a minute. This never happens to me. But I'm so blown away on my end. I have been constantly coming in contact with, and again, this is not a Christian podcast where I spread the word or anything. I'm not reading the Bible. I'm a Christian, but um, I recognize the importance of faith, in our lives, but I've been getting it just in my face. Like every time I speak to anybody, we're talking about God. We're talking about the influence of God. We're talking about, faith and the role it plays in your life. Um, Steve, I love you, man, but if you think that God didn't have a hand in you two hooking up, that coincidence is impossible. I know you know this already. But you were definitely putting each other's lives for that. And I mean, I personally thank God for that, for the both of you. But anyway, I digress. This isn't about me. As I sit here and I listen to your story, as someone who's listening, all I can think about is, the pain and the process and how tough that must have been to go through that. And I certainly don't want you guys to try and, to relive it or anything. I don't want to reopen an old wound, but is there any way you can convey to the folks who are listening how you begin to transition from, I thought I was going to have kids and the realization that's actually in front of you?
So for me, a lot of it was my wife and I first starting to try to have kids. And what happens when you start to have kids uh, is it becomes very, very important for that time of month for your wife. Because once she has her period, that means it didn't take. That's a very bad thing for her. And so when this all started, it was us trying and then the puberty coming and keeping going on that cycle and realizing that somehow we failed. We weren't able to have the child. This is supposed to be very easy. We're told from a very young age that if you look at the opposite sex long enough, you're going to get them pregnant.
Right.
So, so this was supposed to be a very easy process. And when that didn't happen, then it became, all right, well, let's talk to some doctors. Let's see what might be going on here. So we go in and talk to somebody and they figure out, all right, well, it's not taken, so you have a couple of different options. One, let's check you. Check the guy, because we're the easiest. You do a sperm count and it's high or low, and that's the end of it. There's not a
Right.
whole lot of a process after that.
Sure.
For her, there's a number of things that could be going wrong there. So they check me and my swimmers are all right. So go on to her and trying to figure all of that out. And so we do a couple of rounds of in vitro. So just artificial or lab work kind of deal. And it doesn't take. And so we do a few more tests, and that's when we find out that the issue is, in our case, it's egg count, which means that there aren't any other options. I mean, at that point, your option is to have like an egg donor, which means we wouldn't be the biological parents anyway. It would be, her sister or somebody else donating an egg and going through that. So then it becomes a process of, what do we do from here? This isn't going to take biologically. Um, so what are our next steps? Do we take the nut route that Nick and Mary decided to go? Where are we going to lean into family and friends and really help them with their kids? And are we going to do that? Or are we going to go an adoption or fostering route? Are we going to lean in on fostering and helping that whole world and people that have parents that maybe don't want them anymore or something like that? Or are we going to go adoption and go infant? And then do you go national or state or international? There's all these different options that you have. And as my wife and I talked it through, and my wife comes from a family that appreciates and understands therapy. Uh, I do not. So, she did much better in that context, is that she had a therapist to talk to this about. And I didn't, and I didn't really have a big interest in finding one. I wasn't a big believer in therapy. I didn't, I was taught, I was from a small town in Ohio, and I was taught that men don't talk about it. They just, you bury it down, and that's the end of it.
Right. Yeah.
And so, uh, as I talked more with my wife, kind of realizing that maybe wasn't the best option. Uh, and so kind of got into that world a little bit. I leaned into a lot of podcasts. That's honestly how I'm a learner. If I don't understand something, that's the best thing for me to do, is try to let's figure out the nuts and bolts here so I can put them together. So that's what I went down, the kind of the road I went down. And then it was a lot of soul searching of, I'm not going to have kids. I'm not going to be able to take my son to Philmont scout camp anymore like I had planned. And so, that was something I never got to do and when I was in scouts, my whole plan was, that's all right. I'll do it when I have my kid. And now that's not a thing. So I'm trying to do a lot of soul searching of figuring out how okay am I with that? Um, and then, does it make me less of a man, the fact that I can't have kids? And trying to figure out what do I do with that? And, in this case, it was, uh, you know, the problem's my wife's, it's not mine. So I could just leave, and then I could still have this thing that I wanted. Well, that's I love my wife. I don't want to do it with somebody else. And so I wanted to be with her. And so that wasn't an option for me either. So I still want the kids. The biological way isn't going to be it. So let's go down this adoption route. And we didn't want to do fostering because I can't imagine having a kid for a couple of months and then having it go back to another situation. Adoption is going to be the way to go for us. And so that was the process it took, and it took a long time, and it was a lot of hemming and hawing back and forth of, are we just not going to have kids, or are we going to go the adoption route? Because the adoption route is painful, it's strenuous, it's a lot of bureaucracy. And so, are we interested in even doing that? Do we want to just forget about it and go buy an RV and travel the world, and we'll just be retired now? We both have jobs that we could do that with, and not have to worry about the kids. That was a big thing that went through, was, let's forget this kid stage. That sounds like a big pain in the butt anyway. Let's just skip that. And realizing that was making excuses, and not realizing that that's not what we wanted. So adoption was the route for us, and that's where we are now. Well,
Yeah. Oh man, it's been 10 years, so emotions are fine. I can tell you, man, growing up with a large family, the thoughts that run through your head when you realize kids aren't really an option, family might not be a thing. How do you tell your family that? And the the feeling of pure disappointment that you fear is going to happen of telling my family, who's huge, big like Steve, we can't have kids. Stop asking us when we're going to have kids. We can't have kids. And the thought in your head of the minute I tell them that, it's no longer going to be asked, when are you going to have kids? It's going to be straight disappointment and they're done talking to you, period. Because you don't get to provide that grandkid. You don't get to provide that great grandkid. You don't get to provide that cousin. Um, I remember the wife and I decided not no to wait for a very long time until we told our family because we had to be at peace with it. And my family being very hurt by that we didn't want or thought about thinking or thought about walking through that with them. That hurt them more than us telling them we can't have kids. And I remember leaving that Christmas after we told them and going, everything's fine. Like they'll get over it. They can have kids. It's fine. And I felt we moved to Ohio shortly after that, and a couple months after that we moved, and I thought everything was good. I poured my whole life into work, started managing bars, and spent a lot of time working, helping open one bar, and enjoyed every minute of it. And the wife didn't. And during that time, I'll never forget, my younger brother had his firstborn. And I got a call from him, furious, wondering why I didn't show up for the birth of my nephew. And the only response I had at that moment was I had to work. I just had to work. And I remember having a conversation a couple months after that with my wife, just in tears, just beyond frustrated. Because the moment I thought that I was at peace with this and past it, I wasn't. My younger brother was not like me growing up. Him and I are complete opposites. We butt heads. We probably want to hit each other in the head several times, and that was our sibling relationship for a very long time. I remember him telling me, "I don't want to have kids. I'm perfectly fine not having kids. I don't want to have kids." And he's got a kid, and I'm over here wanting to have kids, and I can't have a kid. And I get to watch my younger brother have a kid who doesn't want to have a kid, and I have to be all right with that. That's hard. That's that does a number on you mentally because you thought everything was good and now everything's not. But it also does a number on you because now you don't trust whether or not he wants to take care of that kid because he doesn't want to have kids. And I remember going through what I thought all the emotions were done and understanding I'm at peace not having kids to that. It, it takes a while to get over that and try to understand, okay, he may have said that when he was young, dumb, and stupid. I remember being young, dumb, and stupid, and I said things that I regret. So maybe that's what it was. The emotions never really go away. You can be at peace with the idea of not being able to have kids, but those emotions, those raw emotions of, like Steve said, I don't get to take my kid to this camp anymore. I don't get to take my kid to the place that I thought that's all right. As a kid, that's all right if I don't go there because I get to take my kid there someday. Those emotions come up whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
Those emotions are always there. So um, you ask or you ask the question of what does that look like without bringing up too much of the emotions. The emotions are always there. They're always going to be there, whether you like it or not. That's who
Yeah.
you are. That's um, there's a there's a deep seated instinct in all men to be a father. whether they want to acknowledge it right away or not. There's always that deep-seated instinct of, I want to be remembered. I want to pass something on to the next generation. And as a father, the best way to do that is to have a kid. A daughter or son, doesn't matter, but that's the
Yeah.
best way to that I know how to do that. So I don't get to do that. What does that look like? Okay, I'm all right with it now. All right, now here's another emotion. And as a man, you're going, stop. I don't care about, I don't want to pay attention to these emotions. I'd rather just be done with this and
Yeah.
wipe it away and be done, you know? Um, so it's, I want to focus on that emotion piece. There's no way of getting rid of that emotion. It's always going to be there. It's just a matter of, how are you going to deal with it in the moment? What are you willing to choose to decide? It's a choice. It always is a choice on what you're going to do with that emotion, what you're going to do with that decision. You can either be mad at the person that can have kids and you can't, or you can decide it's all right. That's all right. I can still decide to be all right with the fact that they get to have kids and I don't. My life just looks a little different from theirs, and that's okay. They don't get to decide the life I choose. I don't get to choose the life they live either.
Uh, wow. I mean, you guys, you're both so well spoken about it, and I can tell you spent a lot of time dealing with this stuff, and working through it. You're both amazing for sharing this stuff. I can't thank you enough. Um, I've been doing this for, yeah, over 3 years, almost 4 years, and I've never come across even one person who had this situation and wanted to talk about it. And here I have two guys who are friends with the exact same issue and are open and honest and transparent and willing to talk about it to help other people. If we have anybody in the audience, that's sitting there facing the same issues, maybe they're uh, at that juncture where they're trying to decide: do we have the surgeries? Do we adopt? Do we, what road do we go down? Um, what's your one sort of best practice, your one piece of advice? And I know advice is kind of trite, it's like, what advice you're going to give somebody, because the situation just sucks, I'm sure. But what's your best piece of advice for a man who's dealing with this and, doesn't have, a Steve or a Nick to talk to about all of it?
One thing that I think men have a habit of doing, and myself included, in that anything time something bad happens or something negative happens, we either run from it, fight it away, or bury it. And for me, I've always been a barrier. That's always been my go-to. Anytime something happens, if it's in the negative, I tend to just bury it down and just look at the positive. Let's we're just gonna work through this, whatever that is, that's gonna go away. And like Nick said, those things don't go away. They get buried down in there and they stay. And if you bury them, they're gonna grow. And so if that happens, you're gonna end up becoming that problem. And so my advice is, don't bury it down. When you come across something like this, you have one person to talk to, and it's your wife or your girlfriend or whoever it is. You have that person at least, and they're going through it too. Even though you may not, I don't know whichever one actually has the biological problem. That that's not actually part of the issue. The issue is the two of you can't have kids, which means neither of you can have kids, and so you have at least that one person that you can confide in. And I know for me, my relationship with my wife only got better after this happened, because it forced us to get together and communicate more and talk more so that we can work through these issues. Because if we didn't do that, I know she wouldn't still be here. I know that she would have long gone by then, and I would have missed out on the best thing I had in my life had I just buried it down and not letting her take her part of it and let her experience the same thing I was. So that's the big thing. Don't bury it down. Let somebody else in. You already have one person built in with this, in your spouse or your loved one that you're trying to be with. And then also the other part of it is people are not going to look down on you for this. They're going to maybe feel bad for you. Uh, and if you're lucky, they won't do that either. They'll just try to be there for you and be with you. And like Nick said, you'll be scared of telling your family because you're worried that they're gonna look down on you or feel like you can't give them the grandkids that they wanted.
Yeah.
And man, my family was there for me the whole way.
Thank you, man, for that.
On serious, so I'm very cynical and smart aleck. So you asked the question of what's the advice you'd give, and my immediate thought was to look down at my glass, not to drink. I know that's what it comes across.
I appreciate the levity at that moment. So
Yes,
thank you.
thank you. So the reason I look down at my glass is we talked about earlier the idea of men being able to hold a glass of something and just talk. And it's not what's in the glass, it's not what you drink that's in the glass. It's the fact that you are able to talk. And it's not necessarily that you have to talk about the situation at hand, right? Or talk about your deepest, darkest fears or feelings. It's the idea that you just get to talk with someone that gets it. It's the idea that you don't really know. When Steve and I the club, you talk about the club and inviting Steve to the club. Steve and I got together for the club along with 8 or 6 other guys, and a few of us knew each other and a lot of us didn't know each other, but it didn't matter in the moment. We all got to sit together around a meal with a glass in hand, and those have become some of the closest friends that I would consider friends. And you do it time after time, month after month, year after year, and you finally understand this idea. Growing up, alcohol was bad. Alcohol was really bad. We don't drink. Drinking's of the devil. Now it's not necessarily the drinking. It's the fact that I can sit down with a glass of bourbon, and I know the guy sitting across from me has that same glass of bourbon or some for bourbon in it. And in my mind, I go, they get it. They get me. They understand. And now I can talk about my day. I can talk about life. I can talk about how things are going. And just being able to talk, again, it doesn't have to be about your deepest, darkest secrets. Steve knows I can't have kids. There's 1 or 2 other guys in the club that know I can't have kids. So it's not like this is just shared willy-nilly because they have a glass. But the fact that I'm able to sit down with them and I'm able to talk about something, just talking allows me to go, oh, there's others out there. There's others out there that understand. They may not be in the same position of not being able to have kids, but they understand the frustrations of work. They understand the frustrations of life. I can relate to that. And because of that, now I feel like, okay, I've got these emotions past me. As a man, I feel like I can't show emotions, but now I'm able to talk about it a little bit to where I'm no longer having everything buried on top of this. And now I feel like I can start to talk. The biggest piece of advice is find a way to talk. It doesn't have to be about this. It doesn't have to be about your deepest, darkest secrets, but just learning who you can talk to and learning how to talk will allow you over time to go, okay, I can talk about this and it's okay. It's not going to be the end of the world. I may, as a man, shed a tear or two, and that is okay. But at least I'm able to talk about this, and it's good. It's a good thing.
Thank you for that, man. I just wow. I can't imagine what you've both been through. I can't imagine the coincidence that you're able to be there for each other and that you have that. I mean, folks who watch the video of this are going to see it, but the folks who are listening to it may not, be getting it. But I can see and feel and hear exactly how emotional this is for both of you guys. And you're standing up here like a couple of heroes, just I mean, powering through it and telling your story. I am absolutely honored that you guys decided to talk about this today. This was not the reason I contacted you for the podcast. You know what I mean? It's God works in crazy, crazy ways. And I don't know, man. I really don't. I'm blown away by the both of you. You're a couple of heroes. I'm honored to have you on here today. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I also want to say I'm sending personal invitations to both you guys. I would also be honored if you guys would take a look at our Power Man Within group. I think you'd be great additions to it, and I know there's guys in there that are going to have an issue or something that maybe you can shed some light on, and maybe you can get a little help there too, just for being part of a different kind of brotherhood, and maybe not having to lean on each other, not having to lean on each other all the time for everything. I'm amazed by you guys. I really am. So thank you for all of that. And you have a really cool podcast too.
We think so.
I have no idea what I'm going to title this podcast, to be honest with you, because saying, the guys from the Whiskey Chaser podcast just does not sum up what just happened on this show. I brought you guys on and thought we were going to talk about like some cool bourbons, maybe, and some things. And the next thing I know, we're doing what might be one of the most important podcasts I've ever done in my life. I blown away by you guys. So, thank you both very much. Contact info. Not Steve, Nick. That's a private joke, but
I know I screwed it up last time. I know.
It's all good. Nick, let us know how to contact you guys.
So, irony moment here. Chris or Steve and I were doing a recording for our closing when we first started our podcast, and I screwed up on this probably 3 times. We had to redo it several times. But if you want to contact us via email, it's whiskeychaserclub@gmail.com. No S, right? That's very important.
Got it.
If you want to look us up, we have a Facebook. But if you're like, hey, do you have a website? Yeah, we've got that too. So it's whiskeychaserspod, pod.com.
Right.
With
so
an S.
You're right. It's Whiskey Chaser, okay, club at Gmail, and then it's Whiskey Chasers, plural, pod.com for the website. All right. Good deal.
That's right.
Excellent. Folks, this has just been one of those behind the scenes things where I was afraid I was going to screw it up. And so, last time I was talking, I threw it to Steve. He screwed it up. And now Nick is going, oh my God, I don't want to screw this up.
Yeah,
I gotta slow down.
We've all screwed it up.
I mean, you guys are amazing. Your podcast is great. So people can listen to your podcast. They can have a nice time, feel like they have a seat at the table. I hope that everybody here does go check out this podcast because I really like it a lot. And you guys as individuals, I mean, I'm a better whiskey drinker, maybe, from listening to your podcast, but I'm a better person from having met the two of you, and I hope that our paths continue to cross. You guys are really incredible people. Thank you for coming on today.
Appreciate you having us. Thank you.
Appreciate it as well. So thank you very much.
Folks, I don't know what else I can say to this. Amazing men dealing with very tough things. We all have things in our lives that that hit us. We all want to look up and into the sky and go, seriously, God, I mean, I have to deal with this now. There's always somebody else dealing with something else. And sometimes you really have to stop, count your blessings, and say, look, this is tough, but who am I? Where am I? What have I got in my life? I think it's good for all of us to practice being grateful every once in a while for what we do have in our lives. And I think these guys have given us a stark reminder of that today. Folks, you come to the Power Man, you listen to the Power Man because our mission here is to be better tomorrow than we are today. If you've listened to this podcast, you're already better than you were yesterday. So strive, keep doing what you got to do. You'll be better tomorrow than you are today. You're worth it, and you just have to believe it. Until next time.